This is the Building Automation Monthly Podcast with Phil Zito, episode 72. Hey folks, Phil Zito here, and welcome to episode 72 of the Building Automation Monthly Podcast. In this episode, I will be discussing the difference between Redlines and as-builts. And surprisingly, there is a difference, and it is very important that you understand this difference. Everything I discussed today can be found at buildingautomationmonthly.com/72. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/72. All right, and for today's tip. Today's tip is around IP addresses. And what about IP addresses specifically? And it is about understanding what the default gateway really is. So often, many folks just enter IP addresses into their supervisory devices or into their servers, and they don't really think about what is going on. Maybe you've been taught, hey, you know what? I got to get an IP address, a subnet mask, and a default gateway. But have you ever really wondered what that default gateway actually is? Well, a default gateway is where all traffic that is not meant for that specific subnet goes. See, what happens is you have two things happening on a subnet. The first thing is you have inter-subnet traffic. That's basically like information that's meant for all the houses on your street, all the houses maybe in your zip code, right? And then you have what is outside of your subnet. You have information that's bound for outside of your subnet. And that's kind of like information or mail that is bound for houses that are in a different zip code. And the thing is how does this traffic, this network traffic, know how to get from your zip code to another zip code? Well, first it's got to go to a central place. And in the world of mail, when mail has to go from one zip code to another, it first goes to the post office. And the post office then says, oh, this mail needs to go to that zip code. And it sends it to the other zip code. Well, in the world of IT, that means that your information goes to the default gateway. The default gateway is kind of like the post office. It's going to collect those messages and it's going to know, hey, I need to go to another subnet. I need to go to another zip code. And so it will then take that message and it will then route it to that other zip code, to that other subnet. So that is what a default gateway is used for. Alrighty, folks. So let's dive into today's topic, Redlines and as-builts. There's so much to be said about Redlines and as-builts, especially since I cut my teeth in service. I started off really my career. I kind of look at my career as really two phases of my career, right? I have my, I have no clue what I'm doing phase. And that's kind of leading up to where I got let go from my first building automation job within 6 months of me exiting the military. And a lot of you have probably heard this story, so I'll keep it pretty short. But, I got out of the military, was married, had a 1-year-old, and I had the choice between working at a glass factory, a soap factory, or a building automation company. So I went on Wikipedia, and don't judge me. I'm sure you guys have done this before. I went on Wikipedia and I studied so that I could pass my job interview. And I got hired, and within 6 months, and this, I don't fault this company. I would have probably done the same thing. I didn't know what I was doing. And so they brought me in one day. It was Friday afternoon. They're like, hey, you know what? We got to let you go. And they were really cool to me. They gave me a month's worth of pay. They took care of me, but I was freaking out. I remember on the ride home, I was like shaking. I had to pull over. I was crying. I just was like, I am a failure. And it was at that point that then my kick, it just kicked in, and I just said, F this. I'm going to learn so much about building automation that I will never, ever, ever be in that position again. I will never be sitting there freaking out, not knowing how I'm going to make ends meet. And that kind of led up to this passion that has driven me to learn so much about building automation, which eventually turned into me teaching about what I've learned of building automation. And the first job after that whole experience, the first, real job after that whole experience was doing service work. And with service work, as those of you who have done service work in the past, you know oh so well, you go out to job sites and quite often folks are at their wits' end. Maybe you're being brought in to replace the company that has not been able to solve the problem up until now. So all this pressure is on your shoulders. You can either be, the knight that rides in with shining armor and you solve the problem, or you can be just another one who's failed. And so often it is based on how well you can interpret the documentation that's there, because you're brought in, you're told there's a problem, and you pull out the plans and the specs and you start to look at what's installed. You look at the control drawings. You start to figure out what is in the facility and what is not in the facility. And what folks often don't talk about is your success, or the future success of the person who is going to service that building, is dependent on whether or not a couple steps were taken during the creation of Redlines and as-builts. All right, so up to this point, you've kind of, I hope right now you're feeling the importance behind Redlines and as-builts, because quite honestly, you say Redlines and as-builts, and I'm guilty of this. It's not exactly the sexiest thing to talk about, right? I mean, Redlines and as-builts, if I were to go and create a conference and the topic of the conference speaker was why Redlines and as-builts are important, it probably would not be up there on your top 10 conference speakers to go listen to, right? Everyone seems to want to talk about IoT and analytics and fault detection, but they don't want to talk about the stuff that really happens behind the scenes that's going to make a really big impact. And so that is why today we're talking about Redlines and as-builts. So Redlines, what are Redlines? And what are as-builts? Let's dive into Redlines first, though. What are Redlines? Redlines, quite simply, come from the understanding that you're going to be given a set of plans or a set of specifications. And yes, this is something I really want you to take out from this. You can redline specifications. Actually, it's really important that you do redline specifications, because so often the sequence of operations will sit in a specification, and if you don't redline it, folks won't know how it changed. But what is a redline? So essentially what happens is you're given these plans and specifications to build a building, to install a control system, to program a control system. And what happens is you go in there, you start doing stuff, and then all of a sudden the thermostat, they don't want it in that corner, they want it on the other corner. Oh, by the way, that box, it's not a series fan powered box, it's a cooling only box. Oh, by the way, that sequence where you're gonna first go and close down the economizer before you go and do morning warm-up, well, now they don't want the room stuffy, so the economizer is going to be at 10% when you do morning warm-up. And just these minor tweaks that happen that are quote-unquote changes to how the building's actually going to operate. They're changes to what you're going to do. And then what you would do is you'd have these big drawings, right? These 24 by 36 drawings, these big things, and you're like sitting there, you're sitting on the bucket, and you're taking your red pen and you're redlining the drawings. You're like, oh no, this connects there, that connects there. The control diagram, we really don't hit that controller first with the comm trunk. We actually hit that controller, so you're adjusting your comm trunks, you're adjusting your wiring, you're adjusting your sequences, you're adjusting your settings. Everything that you change should be redlined in the drawings. You should be making those changes. It's really important that you go and you document those changes, right? So you go through and you're like, all right, well, then if that's red lines, what are as-builts? Well, as-builts are how the project is actually built. So what happens is at the end of the project, the general contractor will hand over to the owner a set of final drawings, a set of final plans and specs. And those are the as-built. I'm like, did I say red lines or did I say as? Those are the as-built. All right. So you can see this is tricky, even for someone as experienced as me. You mix these things up so easily, but it's really important that you understand the differences, because when you're communicating to folks, you want to level set expectations, as I'll get to in just a second. So as I was saying, the as-built, right? The as-built are the final drawings. They're as the building was built. Now, here's the really important thing about as-builts. As-builts are only as accurate as the red lines. And as we'll get to in a little bit about the two different ways that you can go about consolidating red lines, the as-builts are going to be vitally important, because oftentimes a lot of issues I've seen from a service perspective stemmed from improper as-builts, because folks didn't properly consolidate information, or just out of pure laziness or out of being rushed on the project, they didn't update the drawings to represent what was as built in the building. So really, what are the differences between red lines and as-builts? Red lines can happen throughout the project. You can have multiple red lines. Okay, so you can redline, and then you can submit your red lines up the change through a request for information or a request for clarification, and then be told not to include your red lines. So you never want to base your service on red lines. Red lines are not necessarily as-built conditions. So as-built, on the other hand, should be the final drawings. There should be nothing more after you go through as-built. As-built should be as it's built. So how do you get to the point where you have as-builts from red lines? And so what happens typically is 1 to 2 ways that as-builts are realized. One is that each contractor is going to take their red lines and create as-built documents based on the red lines. I really freaking hate this method. This is a stupid method. It's one you shouldn't do because of this exact reason that I'm about to describe. What's gonna happen if you have a mechanical plan that has an HVAC guy on it? Maybe it has a BAS guy on it. Maybe it also has another guy. Maybe let's say that you're using a specialty contractor for doing some work with maybe hydronic systems, or maybe you've got somebody who is looking at loads and they're doing some sort of load calculations for roofing or stuff like that, and that's a specialty contractor that the mechanical doesn't want to handle that risk. So you got, 3 contractors right there, maybe 4, and they're all kind of tweaking their drawings. They all have their own set of red lines, okay? So you've got all that, and then each one of them has a final mechanical drawing. Well, which one is the right final mechanical drawing? Well, if the mechanical is saying his drawing's right and all these other subs are under him, whose drawing do you think he's going to go with? Now, he's not going to go with the BAS guy's drawing. He's going to go with his freaking drawing. He doesn't want to do extra work. He's going to go say, yep, these are the as-builts. Here you go, Mr. GC. Take them and run with them. And that is why I hate when individual subcontractors create their own as-built. Now, granted, there are areas of as-built that can be done fine, like control drawings. No one else is going to be touching the control drawings. Your controller is going to be wired up a certain way, and that's the end of it. So you can as-built your control drawings. You don't have to worry about someone else tweaking those. But here's the other method, and I like this method, but it can also backfire on you. It's a little bit of a dance, right? I mean, no one method is the right way, but here's the method I prefer. And what it is that everyone submits their red lines up to like the mechanical, and then the mechanical will reconcile all of those red lines. Or maybe all of the red lines get submitted to the GC, and the GC will reconcile all of those red lines. Now, here's the only problem with that. What happens when red lines conflict? If a GC is being rushed and he's like, oh crap, we got to close out the job. I got 10% retainer and it's sitting there and that's several $1,000,000 and I want to get off the job because time is money. And I'm sitting there basically giving people a loan because I'm losing money and they're gaining money because they don't have to pay me. So they're getting interest on the money they don't have to pay me. So I'm just going to reconcile this stuff as fast as possible. And whichever one seems right is the one I'm going to go with. I've seen that happen time and time again where red lines conflict and they don't bring the two contractors together and they just reconcile and it's wrong. Now, in most cases, this isn't that big of a deal. However, it can come up to bite you in the butt, especially when you're doing really weird sequences like ice storage or some sort of like ERV, energy recovery ventilator spinning wheel of fun that, gosh, I hate those things. But anyways, you're sitting there and you're working on that stuff and the mechanicals doesn't quite match up with the controls guys. And next thing you know, you got a sequence drawing or maybe a mechanical drawing that's not quite accurate. So, I mean, no method is perfect necessarily. The going and consolidating at the GC is not necessarily perfect. In my opinion, it's much better than consolidating at the individual contractor level. But here's the thing. What you have to realize is that how you go and do your red lines and how you finalize your as-built is gonna have lasting impact. I mean, here's the deal. Let's say that you are sitting there and you're doing a retrofit, or you're sitting there and you're servicing something. Well, how the as-builts are done can have a massive impact on how you price, how you go and plan out your execution, how you time the job, how you decide what system you're going to want to cut the wire on first. I've seen improper as-builts actually take down entire buildings because the as-built said the comm trunk of the BAS was run a certain way, so they went and terminated the comm trunk. They went and just cut the wires, and all of a sudden, I mean, this was at a school. I remember being there, and this was during the school year that they wanted to do an add-on, so they went and cut a trunk, and they actually took the trunk down for the majority of the school, and we had to go and do butt splices and all sorts of craziness. And you got to imagine butt splicing a comm trunk. That's not exactly the best way to do it. A butt splice is kind of like where it's like a Chinese finger trap, right? Where you stick your two fingers in the actual little thing, the little holes, and then they get stuck. Well, that's essentially what a butt splice is. You splice the two wires that you cut together into this little piece of plastic with these metal contactors inside it, and you crimp those down, which means you tighten those down, and then that basically joins the wire together. Yeah, you could do wire nuts as well. That would work, I mean, just as bad as butt splice does. But the point is now you've gone and you've introduced resistance, which is just going to make your comm traffic ugly. It's really going to hurt your comm trunk. So it's really important. Now, another area that you really want to be careful with red lines and as-builts are if you're using multiple technicians on a project. I've seen this time and time again where the mechanical will go and they will basically redline, or they will make a change to their controls drawings. Maybe they make a change to the name of the boxes or the location of the boxes. And because of this, maybe the controls tech does not have the latest change because construction communications are not necessarily the best. And if you aren't, and by the way, this is why you should be at job meetings. This is why you should go to the job site meetings. Because if you are sitting there and you're not aware that the mechanical plans have changed and they haven't been sent out to you, you could be sitting there entering min and max CFMs or programming boxes or all sorts of things, and it be completely wrong. And you're just wasting time. You're messing stuff up because it's not properly designed. So you really got to keep pace with these kind of things. You've got to make sure that you are staying up to date with drawings. So it's not just that Redlines and as-builts impact the service professionals, but they also impact the installers. So it's really important for you to understand what revision of drawings you're under. You really want to establish a relationship with your mechanical contractor so that when new revisions of the drawings or sequence or specs come out, that you're kept up to date, that you're given these right away, and that you're sharing them with your installation team. Because if you aren't, I've seen time and time again where projects get hosed up because of folks not paying attention to where the project is at and what the drawings represent. All right, folks, so there you have it. That's what Redlines and as-builts are. That's why it's so important for you to understand how to do good Redlines and how to consolidate those into as-builts, and why as-builts are so important, and why it's so important for you to understand the version of Redlines or adjusted drawings you are at on a project. So, with that being said, I'd really like to hear your stories about as-builts and Redlines. What are your strategies for making sure that you're properly versioning your drawings, meaning you're keeping your drawings up to date and folks know what drawings they're working with? What are your strategies for going and creating as-builts that are effective and accurate, working with multiple different contractors to make sure that what's on the drawing is properly represented? I'd love to hear those in the comment section. I'd love to read those in the comment section at buildingautomationmonthly.com/72. Once again, that is buildingautomationmonthly.com/72. And until next time, keep learning, keep trucking, keep working. You're getting better every day. Keep improving your knowledge. It doesn't happen overnight, but you can massively accelerate your knowledge by sitting here and putting in the time, putting in the effort. All right? I will see you on the next podcast episode. Thanks a ton. Take care.